Chapter 4 is about attention. Attention is our ability to focus on a specific stimuli or location in our environment. We can engage in selective attention or divided attention. Selective attention takes place when we attend to one thing and we ignore everything else around us. For example, if you are working hard on your research project and the TV is playing in the background, or your children are talking to you, or your spouse, if you focus only on your research project and you ignore everything else that's happening in your environment, you're engaging in selective attention. Divided attention happens when we pay attention to more than one thing at the same time. For example, there's been a lot of recent research on distracted driving. So when we drive, a lot of times we try to divide our attention. So we drive the car, which that takes us maintaining our attention, but we might also listen to music, or we might also talk to other people in the car, or we might take a phone call. Those are all situations where we're dividing our attention and paying attention to more than one thing at a time. Dichotic listening happens when we have one message that's presented to our left ear and another message that's presented to our right ear. And what's supposed to happen with dichotic listening is the participant is supposed to shadow one message to ensure he's attending to that message. So in one ear, a person might hear the meaning of life is, and in the other ear, they might hear the yellow dog chased. And the person is supposed to try to filter out the message from their unintended ear so that they can hear the shadowed message. Most of the results from dichotic listening studies show that participants cannot report the content of the message in their unattended ear. Like they know that they heard something. They might even know the gender of the speaker, but they can't really process what the message was. So we can think of this in terms of things such as the cocktail party effect. The cocktail party effect happens when we're at a cocktail party or at a big party, and we are able to carry on a conversation with the person we are talking to, even though there's loud music and other conversations happening around us. So you might notice that there are other things happening, but you can selectively attend to the conversation you want to attend to. So when we think about selective attention, there are a lot of different models, lots of research that's been done in this area. First, we have the early selection model, which was Broadbent's filter model. We have an intermediate selection model, which was Treisman's attenuation model. And then we have a late selection model, which was by McKay in 1973. So we're going to talk about all three of these models in detail. Starting with Broadbent's filter model. According to Broadbent, we are able to filter messages that come in first through our sensory experiences. So when we hear a message, we encode it based on our senses, and we're going to only hold that information for a very small period of time. And that is whether we see, smell, touch, taste, hear the message. Then, after we've taken the message into our senses, we then filter the message and we identify the characteristics of the message that's being sent to us. So, after we are able to filter the message, we send it on to our detectors, which processes the information that we've received using higher order thinking, characteristics of the message. And then the message is sent very quickly to our short-term memory, which will hold it for about 10 to 15 seconds. And if it is properly encoded, it will go on to long-term memory. But through Broadbent's research, it couldn't really explain the cocktail party phenomenon and why somebody couldn't remember a person's name, even though they weren't listening to their conversation. And it also can explain meaningful messages that switch from one ear to another, like in the Dear Aunt Jane series of 1960. In Treisman's attenuation model, he looked at intermediate selective attention, which he said that when we have a message, it can be separated from an unintended message early on in the information processing system. And that selection will occur also later. So it's early selection and then also later selection of the message. So we've got the message coming in, then an attenuator, and those attended and unattended messages come in, and then it leads to the dictionary unit. And here's more of what those things are. So the attenuator is going to analyze the incoming message for physical characteristics, language, meaning. It's going to be attended to or unattended to. Those attended to messages are going to get the full strength of the attenuator, where those unattended messages are going to get a much weaker strength attenuation. And then on to the dictionary unit, which is going to contain words which can be activated. So words that are common or familiar, like your own name, would have a low threshold for attenuation. And then uncommon words, such as rutabaga, is going to have a higher threshold for attenuation, because that's something you really have to think a lot more about. And then we have the late selection models. This was done by McKay in 1973, which says that when we attend to stimuli for that final processing doesn't occur until after the message has been analyzed for meaning. So in your attended ear, a participant could hear an ambiguous sentence such as they were throwing stones at the bank. And in the unattended ear, that person is either going to make meaning for the word river or money, and that is going to determine how they see the sentence. They're going to choose what's closest to their meaning. So if that person says they threw stones toward the side of the river yesterday, they're going to assume that it's referring to a riverbank. Or if they heard they threw stones at the Savings and Loan Association yesterday, then they're going to assume that the bank referred to money. So there's always some type of biasing word that can impact a participant's choice with a late selection model. And participants are often unaware of how that biasing word is taken in by them. The load theory of attention says that we have a processing capacity and a perceptual load capacity when it comes to maintaining our attention. The processing capacity says that how much information a person can handle at any given moment is their processing capacity, is how much can I take in. Whereas perceptual load is how difficult is this thing that you're being asked to do. Things that have high load difficulty need more processing. Things with low load perceptual abilities need lower amounts of processing capacity. The Stroop test is a test of attention that can tell us whether or not a person is able to filter and attend to saying the color instead of a word or instead of a shape that they're looking at. Oftentimes, when people are brain damaged, they struggle with being able to do this, or if they have attention problems, it becomes very difficult to filter out the name from the color or the shape from the color of the image. Overt attention, involves your eye movements, your attention, and your perception. So how do we overtly pay attention to the things that are happening around us using our eyes? Bottom-up determinants of eye movement focus on the characteristics of the stimulus, different color and motion, things that are capturing your attention when it comes to whatever is existing in your environment. Top-down determinants of eye movements are often based on your schemas. So those schemas are going to exist already in your mind, and they'll help you guide through or navigate whatever situation you're looking at. So in those top-down determinants, you might look at everything that exists in the environment around you. If you see the bread, then you know, okay, I'm fixated on the bread, and then I see these containers of peanut butter. I know that there's probably going to be a peanut butter sandwich that's being made. Anytime that we have covert attention without eye movements, then that is when you're going to direct your attention to something without moving your eyes. You're going to keep your eyes fixated on one point. And participants in these type of studies responded faster to a light at an exception location, at one expected location than at an unexpected location. And you can see from the chart the results of that study of how people were able to, not engage in eye movements and what they were able to see. When it comes to our divided attention, this practice enables people to kind of do two things at once. And it can be very difficult for people to do. So automatic processing occurs without intention and only uses some of a person's cognitive resources. In 1977, lots of research was being done on our ability to divide our attention. So they looked at memory sets, which were 1 to 4 characters that targeted a stimulus, and then test frames, which could contain random dots and targets and distractors. We've also looked at cell phone usage, which we talked about in cars, and you guys will explore that a little bit more this week as well in your assignment. A lot of research, in 2001, this sort of simulated driving research has showed us that participants on their phone missed twice as many red lights and took longer to apply their brakes, even if they were using hand-free devices. And we know that accident risk has been 4 times higher when using a cell phone. There are a lot of things that have told us this, and you add on texting and driving, and of course that has made things much even more complicated. Intentional blindness is the idea that when a stimulus is not attended, it's not perceived, even though a person might be looking directly at it. So if we don't directly pay attention to something, we may not see it because of inattentional blindness. Object-based visual attention involves location and objects. Location-based is moving attention from one place to another, and object-based is your attention being directed to one place on an object. And in 1994, there was a study done where participants saw 2 side-by-side rectangles followed by a target cue. The reaction time was fastest when the target appeared where it indicated, and the reaction time was also faster when the target appeared in the same rectangle. The enhancing effect of attention spreads throughout an object. Attention can be based on an environment or a specific object, as you can see in figure 4.17. Change blindness involves when people are shown 2 versions of a picture, the differences between them are not immediately apparent, and a task is to identify differences requiring concentration, attention, and search. This picture in figure 4.26 is pretty popular in psychology with these people who are at a basketball game and there's somebody in a gorilla suit. Most people are not able to even notice the person in the gorilla suit initially. Binding is the process by which features such as color, form, motion, and location are combined to create our perception of a coherent object. And feature integration theory, or FIT. This is the idea that our pre-attention stage is automatic, doesn't require effort or attention. We can be unaware of processes, and the objects analyzed can be created into features. This is a part of Treisman's attenuation model. So when we focus our attention can play a key role and features can be combined. So in 1982, they started to look at sort of illusory correlations and experiments. And there was a study done by Treisman and Schmidt that found these four things: that if you ignore black numbers and focus on objects, and participants can correctly pair shapes and colors, participants report a combination of features from different stimuli, and illusory conjunctions occur because features are free floating. REM is a good patient to use to discuss feature integration theory, which says that he was a patient with Balint syndrome, and that was the inability to focus his attention on the individual objects, with a high number of illusory conjunctions reported. This involves mostly bottom-up processing. Top-down processing influences processing when participants are told what they would see, and it combines with feature analysis to help one perceive things accurately. So when we talk about the physiology of attention, we're saying that attention enhances neural responding. Our intentional processing is distributed across a large number of areas in the brain. Functional MRI scans have been able to show us that and to help us detect cortical activity during a search task. And attention to an expected direction of motion caused brain activity to increase in a number of brain areas, as you can see in figure 4.18.